It's no secret to anyone that a night in Tinder can end with a kiss, a hug, sex, or even a family creation. Or as in the case I will tell today, the murder of a girl, participants in a sex cult, dismemberment of her body and scattering of remains along the roads. Swipe right and sit tighter, dear ones, because this is scary. So, you are now looking at the 24-year-old American, Sydney Loofe. Today's story is about her. Sydney was born in the state of Nebraska in a provincial town called Broken Bow. Her mother, Susie, worked as a teacher in classes where there were children with disabilities, and her father, George, was the school principal. From a young age, Sydney began to devote a lot of time to basketball and golf, and in the girl's own words, she likes it. It seemed that whatever she was doing, everyone expected that she would tie her whole life with sports. Well, at least for a while, but it didn't happen. The truth is that in her teenage years, a scoliosis developed, which later became an obstacle to further training. And this, frankly, led to a depressive state, through which she began to take antidepressants. In which, dear, there is nothing in contrast to today's history. There is nothing scary if you are assigned to them by a qualified psychiatrist. After finishing school, Sydney had a great desire to change something in her life. She also first collected all her speeches, laid out from summer details of money, and left from her parents' house. Moreover, not to the neighboring building or something like that, but straight away to another city, Lincoln. There she quickly found a job at a small store called Menards, which sells a lot of goods for the house. This means that at this time, Sydney's parents were left alone. They supported her as best they could. They continued to talk often and call each other more frequently. Indeed, in the last phone conversations, the girl complained that she was not getting better. She wanted to change something again, but this time she decided on something less drastic than moving. First, she found a new job, and then she registered on Tinder to try and find someone to spend time with and feel less lonely. See, Sydney, like most people on Earth, needed love and understanding, and she didn't want to be alone all the time. The woman's profile was filled out according to her preferences. She stated that she was not looking for a partner, but a partner. Come on, throw in your 2 cents about this issue in the comments, so this video becomes more noticeable to the YouTube algorithm. Well, while you're writing, I'll turn to the story. Indeed, one autumn day in 2017, the buzzing Tinder in Sydney became a battlefield. She matched with a girl named Audrey, a long-haired 25-year-old brunette with a pleasant smile. And this attraction turned out to be mutual. Word for word, compliment for compliment, emoji for emoji, and they already agreed on the first date. She went over every detail twice, wondering whether she should meet the new acquaintance on time or be late. To which Audrey replied, "Yes, it will be just the two of us, only you and me." On November 14th, the girls met, took a little walk, talked, and ended up, so to speak, at Audrey's apartment. It's unclear exactly what happened during the date, but something definitely occurred that upset Sydney. The girls planned their next meeting for the following day, November the 15th. Ready for the date, the girl wrote in a Snapchat before leaving the house to meet with Audrey. On the evening of November 15th, Sydney got into her car to go to Audrey's and hasn't been in contact with anyone since. Never. This is her last photo and the last post on social media in life. Her work colleagues were the first to notice her absence. The young woman had recommended herself as a responsible worker who had not missed a single shift without warning. They were surprised that Sydney did not show up for work. Her mother was also disturbed. She knew that the girl had gone to a party and didn't want her, as they say, to sleep. She wrote asking if everything was okay, but even the next day, the girl didn't receive a response. She also turned to the police. On November 17th, law enforcement officers came to the rented apartment of Sydney and found no one there. They also noticed no signs of struggle or violence. The girl's car was parked near the building in its usual spot. Oddly enough, indicating that the girl hadn't been home, her pet cat was hungry, even though she never forgot to feed her beloved pet before. So it was through this minor detail that her parents and friends realized that something was wrong with Sydney. Something was definitely wrong. The police were ready to start the search, but then they immediately ran into a dead end. The last person who saw Sydney was her new acquaintance Audrey, but finding her was not so easy for them. The police had no relevant information about this woman. No address, no phone number, Not even a rough place of residence. Fortunately, Sydney had good friends, especially Brooklyn McCrystal, who set up Tinder and just started swiping all the profiles until she stumbled upon that same Audrey. Swipe right, mutual like from Audrey's side, and here Brooklyn already has the phone number of the one who, presumably, knows what happened to Sydney. It's surprising the police didn't think of this sooner, and no matter what, they got some kind of information to work with further. Indeed, after checking Audrey's phone number, it turned out that Audrey really doesn't exist. It was just a fake name for Tinder, and in real life, the girl is called Bailey Boswell. In addition, the defense found out that the last signal from Sydney's lost phone was fixed at 20:32:15 on November. That day, the girl was seen near the apartment where Audrey lived, who, as we know, is actually Bailey. It's also important to note that Audrey, or rather Bailey, didn't live in this apartment alone. The apartment was officially rented by Aubrey, who was her 51-year-old partner. Who are these people and how are they connected to Sydney's disappearance? And they're connected in such a convoluted way, it's hard to wrap your head around it. But let's take it one step at a time. To get the full picture, I need to tell you who Bailey Boswell and Aubrey are. Indeed, the same Aubrey, he and Bailey Boswell were from the small town of Leon in the state of Iowa. In school, Bailey was into running and was one of the best track and field athletes in the entire state. Due to her accomplishments, she was awarded a scholarship for college studies. In short, things were going great for her until they took a turn for the worse. After all, change is inevitable. Unfortunately, bad times are tough too. Later, the girl's mother admitted that Bailey had been calling her at college, but she never discussed it with anyone and did not turn to either the police or a therapist. Also, after entering college, Bailey got married to a man from whom she constantly suffered physical, moral, and sexual abuse. The Stosunki were always considered a happy new family, and no one was surprised when unexpectedly, after the birth of their baby, both parents lost custody. The child was given to Bailey's mother, and she herself threw the man out, divorced him, and moved to a new place to start over. After relocating, Bailey's priority was to post an online announcement. Indeed, not about looking for a job or an apartment, but a sponsor. On one of the dating sites, she directly wrote to her sugar daddy, a round tattooed man. The same announcement was responded to by Aubrey, a man with a troubled childhood and a rich criminal past, without whom this whole story would have been impossible. Apparently, when Trail was 2 years old, his parents abandoned him. His grandfather saw the little boy and took him in. But that was short-lived. After ending her relationship, Trail's mother brought him back home. And the woman's new relationship was no better than the previous one. Trail repeatedly faced abuse and neglect. Later, his relatives took him away from his family, and he was forced to constantly move from one foster home to another until he ended up in prison. As an adult, Trail found himself in the field of law enforcement for petty theft, money laundering, and traffic violations. If you don't count his teenage years, Aubrey's criminal history spans from 1999 to 2017. Continuing this trend, Trail spent a total of 9 years behind bars. And the most shocking thing in this man's history, and probably the most shocking thing in the story I'm telling today, is not this, but the fact that he was the founder of a sex cult, the central figure of which he himself was. These are just the beginning. Things get much stranger from here. Trail called himself a vampire and claimed that he feeds, respects, flies, and reads minds. He, so to speak, went hunting among women he found on the internet and in bars. Those who believed in his story and joined the cult, Trail called his brides. At the beginning of 2017, there were 12 of these so-called brides, the queen of which was Ms. Bailey Boswell, and she, so to speak, was engaged in the further production of new brides. Well, after she became the queen, among other things, each of the women was on a morning trail and literally received money from him. Such a person was trying to deal with the problematic past of the skin and get to the skin doctor. Yes, it's not that simple. They broke the rules. Firstly, witches were not supposed to communicate with other people, generally speaking. Secondly, always be in touch with the vampire and call him daddy. Well, thirdly, to stay at his apartment once a day so he can have sex with them. Or they pretended to do it without him. There were no other rules. But over time, another one was added, but it was extremely important. To join the community, one had to inhale another person's breath. to beat a person. Now, archival footage from the surveillance camera is in front of you. On these, dated November 14th, 2017, Bailey and Aubrey settle in a hotel that is not far from Sydney's place of work. Later that day, the girls had a meeting after getting acquainted on Tinder, and it was their first date. And this is November 15th, the day of the second date. At 10:25, Bailey and Aubrey arrived at the hardware store. They bought a knife, almost 3 gallons of bleach, a saw, garbage bags, and a stationery knife. Later that day, Trail added a cord and air freshener to the same store where Sydney worked. What's more, he even flirted with her, but she didn't pay him any attention. A little later in another place, Bailey and Trail bought a can opener for their food, as well as another saw and a drill. Again, just to save a buck, on November 15th, Sydney and Bailey had a feast, after which no one saw them alive again. The next day, the landlord of the apartment that Bailey and Trail had rented complained about a terrible smell coming from the apartment. The smell was so strong that it made some of the landlord's family members sick, and some even showed signs of an allergic reaction. That's how much bleach was there. On top of that, Bailey and Trail, or as they called themselves, the King and the Vampire, had turned off the air conditioner. It was a bit strange, almost as if winter had come in just a few days. On November 19th, the police came to their apartment with a search warrant, but they didn't find anyone there. In order to conduct the search, they had to get a warrant, even though the apartment was rented and the landlord was not nearby. Later that same day, with a warrant, the police came back to the apartment again and tried to find something that could lead them to the suspects. But they practically found nothing. Here's a quote from one of the police officers. "We were surprised that we couldn't even clean part of the apartment." Then the defense attorneys actively began searching for evidence from Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail. And only on November 28th, they were officially recognized as suspects in the disappearance of Sydney Loofe. Surprisingly, the suspects released a video on Facebook the next day, revealing information about themselves. Next, you will see clips from this address in the original, but with subtitles. Also, if you're just listening to this video and don't know English, lean in closer, look at the screen so you don't miss anything.
This is Benny Boswell, I guess. Y'all also know her as Audrey. But we spent the last few days watching ourselves being slammed and crucified in the newspapers. We thought it was time we had our say. The Lincoln Police Department apparently won't. Everyone should know that we are avoiding, that we are not talking to them, that we're avoiding them. You've already crucified us in the newspapers. You've already crucified us on Facebook. You know, in America, I sure thought it was a trial first. But I guess not. You've heard all of this stuff about my criminal history. All true as far as I know. I'm not wanted for anything. I'm a person of interest and I'm not really running from anything. I pray for Sydney. I hope she's found soon. I wish the family the best. Sorry that she wasn't with you on Thanksgiving. And that's pretty much all I can say for now.
And that's what Mrs. Boswell stated.
I'm Bailey Audrey on Tinder, and this really isn't about me. This is about Sydney. I met her on a Tuesday. We drove around Lincoln, smoked weed, had a great time. We hit it off, picked it up the next night at her house. We drank, she was there, blew the winds again. I went to her house and she invited me in to go to a friend's house. Then I didn't hear from her for a while. I just want my family to know that I'm okay and there's nothing they can do about it. And I hope that Sydney will be found very soon. She is a wonderful, wonderful daughter.
Because of this incident, they called the police. Well, you know, just in case. And they unexpectedly published another video lasting 11 minutes. I will now describe it to you in my own words. Here I am, all of me. I'm not hiding from anyone. These are my eyes, teeth, hair. This is me. I'm a villain with a criminal past, but I haven't killed anyone. You all kept blaming us. Surprisingly, this video evidence did not convince the police of the innocence of the so-called cult couple. Still, their search continued. On November 30th, the police managed to track down the King and the Vampire. They were found in a motel in the provincial Branson, Missouri. The suspects had maps, sleeping bags, and tourist gear with them. It seems all this was part of their plan to escape to Mexico. Also, during the search, phones were found on both of them. thanks to which more precise information about what was on them was found out, which was even more serious. The details of the couple's escape are even more intriguing. Using this data, after a few days of investigation, on December 4th, the police found a black garbage bag on the usual route a few hours away from the building where the murder of Bailey and Sydney took place. The following day, 13 additional packages were found, all considerably far apart from one another. Each contained parts of Sydney's body, which had traces of being cut with a thin, sharp object, similar to a saw or knife, the kind previously purchased by Trail and Boswell. Also found later were items belonging to Sydney: car keys, a phone case, a belt, and a purse, in which the girl was in the last photo she posted on Snapchat. While the search for all body parts and new evidence was ongoing, the suspects were already behind bars awaiting trial. Initially, both denied their involvement in the murder, but by January of the following year, Aubrey Trail claimed he wanted to plead guilty to Sydney's death. But he soon recanted, saying the woman died accidentally during a sex act with Bailey, and he asked to be executed. Not about being released, but about being executed. Here's a direct quote. "Life for life, such are the rules in my upbringing." In one interview, Trail claimed that he, Bailey, and Sydney fantasized about threesomes. And specifically, it was a fantasy about how he would seduce her, Sydney. Eventually, everything got out of control, and he accidentally suffocated her to death. In the upcoming trial, Trail denied some previous statements, claiming there were no actual fantasies, and in fact, no sex at all. But he continued to insist that he, albeit accidentally, suffocated Sydney. With the money saved, he was involved in the resale of stolen movies. Speaking, it was his job for which both he and those who were involved with him received money. Among such known workers, according to the trailer version, was Sydney Love, who herself waited for the details. Here's a quote from the trailer. "When Sydney died, there was a lot of sex, especially with astonishment. It's not easy to go that far, but it happened. And here's the thing, there was no human confirmation of the rumors." Indeed, on June 11th, 2018, Boswell and Trail were charged with improper disposal and unauthorized use of human remains. The prosecution later announced that they would seek the death penalty for both, exactly what Trail wanted. During the course of the trial, which lasted not 1 year, he even tried to take his own life, shouting that Boswell was not guilty and cursed everyone in the courtroom. During this period, it turned out that Boswell and Trail were communicating in code. In the confidential statements, the man told Boswell that he himself, like her, has to testify in court. He was the one who was instigating, and she was reluctantly participating in the instigation. The court process was prolonged due to the complexity of presenting evidence. Moreover, the difficulty was compounded by the fact that they were unable to find the tools used to dismember the body. It was also impossible to identify to whom the fingerprints found on the victim's belongings belonged. The hotel workers where the Baileys checked in and the store workers where they bought the murder kit, so to speak, all gave consistent testimonies that the couple was definitely preparing for this crime. Against them were also checks, surveillance cameras, and the location of the phones, which could be traced with the help of a cellular network. To bring the gravity of the crime to the court and the jury, the court also heard from several women who were victims at the time and who spoke about the cult proposed by Trail. They spoke about how the Queen and the vampire were discussing how they would hunt and kill women. Not specifically Sydney, but such conversations were there. They wanted to film all this and get millions of views for the video. After Trail found himself in trouble, he tried to make everything look like an accident and a mercy. The man was described as a person with a troubled and problematic childhood, and also someone who helps the police restore justice. Moreover, the lawyer claimed that Sydney herself was seeking the fulfillment of her fantasies in life. Even on her computer, they found a meme with images of violent sex and astonishment. The lawyer also didn't forget to ask about Mrs. Boswell's traumatic childhood, suggesting that during Sydney's upbringing, Trail himself manipulated her. In the end, it all came down to one thing. The plan was to make it so there would be no death penalty for both. But let's say it didn't quite work out. During the trial, the prosecutors demonstrated nearly 50 photos of the deceased Sydney. After the shocking photos of the mutilated girl and her severed head, it took only a few hours to deliver the verdict to Trail. In 2021, he was sentenced to death by injection. Baelish only received a life sentence. as her daughters did not understand the concept of mitigating circumstances necessary for a death sentence in the state of Nebraska. To note, earlier this year, Baelish filed an appeal seeking to overturn the life sentence. She is relying, in particular, on the fact that during the trial, the jury was shown an excessive amount of photos from the crime scene. Did the girl achieve her goal? The court is currently reviewing the case. We'll see later. What happened to Sydney Love? Her body was found on December 11th, 2017. The family held a private funeral at the Lutheran church, which the girl had often visited. Dear ones, if you've watched this video all the way to this second, know that you are the best. It's not necessary, of course, to panic and see danger everywhere, but at the very least, it's worth valuing your life and not being careless. Remember this. I also want to remind you that sponsors on Buy Me a Coffee and official sponsors on YouTube, who can become one for as little as 10 hryvnia a month, often get to see a new release at least a few days before it comes out. By subscribing, you contribute to this channel's development. Thanks to all who have subscribed already. This was Sanya. See you very soon. Very soon, and in the meantime, share this video or this one. They're also cool. That's all. I've explained everything for everyone.